Hey everybody, Eric Grenier here, and welcome to the 134th episode of the Writ Podcast. The writs have dropped in both New Brunswick and British Columbia, with voters going to the polls on October 19th in BC and on October 21st in New Brunswick. Polls suggest both contests are too close to call, which means the next few weeks of campaigning could be decisive. So in this episode, we're going to check in on where things stand in both provinces, starting in British Columbia, where David Eby's New Democrats are facing a real challenge from the upstart Conservatives under John Rustad. Richard Zussman is the legislative reporter for Global News in BC, and he joins me from the road. Richard, how are you?
I'm great, Eric. I am in Chilliwack, which is one of those ridings the NDP picked up in 2020 at a big surprise. It was the sweep through the Fraser Valley, areas that the NDP had not had a lot of electoral success, but demographics are changing out here, and it swept through. And so this is the first visit on day 5 of the campaign out here, but we've seen a lot of David Eby out in the Fraser Valley. Spent some time in Langley. That's another area where there were surprise victories for the NDP 4 years ago in 2020. So that's why the focus is here in Chilliwack, attempting to hold on to those seats. They want a pretty significant majority in 2020. They don't have to hang on to all of the gains, but they for sure would like to protect some of these incumbents here. And in this case, it's Dan Coulter and Kelly Patton. They've both done very good work for the NDP in Victoria, and that's why the NDP is spending some time out in this region in an attempt to try to keep these seats.
So just to contrast a bit with New Brunswick, where apparently there isn't a media bus, what are the accommodations like out there?
Yeah, so for the NDP, full bus, fully funded campaign, traveling all across Metro Vancouver, already a trip to Terrace. Funny, because the last time you and I spoke in the midst of that big news about Kevin Falk, and that was the part of the province that I was in at that point, campaign went up there, spending some time on Vancouver Island. The Conservatives don't have a campaign bus. Part of that is just the circumstances, right? The fact that this party has soared so quickly, so fast, organizing things like a full tour and bus take time, resources. The Conservatives are still raising a lot of money, but they weren't able to get together a full bus. So there's been some times where, he's outside of Metro Vancouver and all we have there with him is a camera operator. And then there'll be times where he's having events in Metro Vancouver. And the Greens have not typically had a campaign bus, and they don't this time as well. So, big bus, David Eby's face on the side of it, cruising around Metro Vancouver in sort of a more traditional style of traveling on a campaign.
All right, so what's your assessment of the campaign so far, the early days?
Yeah, so it's obviously very, very close. There's also a frustrated electorate, right? People are mad about cost of living, about healthcare, and really mad about public safety. They are frustrated with the government on those issues, but it's unclear what impact that will have electorally. We have seen, David Eby say, well, re-elect me because we are doing the work here, that things are getting better. We've seen a change in some positions from the NDP, one of them on the issue of involuntary care. Clearly, mental health and addictions, drug use connected to public safety is a crucial issue here. We've also had a bit of controversy, not surprisingly again. Conservative leader John Rustad, a video from back in June, describing the COVID-19 vaccines as so-called vaccines and saying that he regrets getting his COVID shots, largely because of a health issue he says he experienced after receiving that second vaccine. But, that it brings in that question around anti-science, which voters are uncomfortable with broadly. I think, yes, people have grown a little bit wary of talking about COVID, but here in BC, there was massive buy-in to the vaccination program, and hearing something like that raises some concerns for them. Also, big announcement from Rustad back to that public safety and drug issue, saying that he would get rid of all supervised consumption and inhalation sites. It's interesting because Pierre Poilievre went part of the way there, saying that he would remove ones that were, close to schools and close to daycares, but the provincial Conservatives say they would get rid of them all and replace them with intake centers to provide treatment for drug users. I would suspect, Eric, this may be one case. We've seen a lot of the BC Conservatives following the federal Conservatives. My suspicion is we may see this in the inverse, that this may be a policy, if proven popular in BC, the federal Conservatives may adopt and say, you know what, let's get rid of all these supervised sites and make them recovery centers, treatment centers. So if someone comes to use their drugs, they are provided immediate treatment and help in doing that, not a place to use those drugs.
Has it been heavy on policy announcements and things like that in the early days?
Yeah, we've seen a few pieces. There was a really significant housing piece from the NDP early in the campaign that focused in on a creative model where developers working with the province through nonprofits would build 25,000 units over 5 years, and the government would support up to 40% of that market value of the property. And there's different repayment structures over time. But in essence, if you keep that property for 25 years, you only have to repay that 40% at a 1% interest rate, which everyone knows is an incredible deal. So it's an innovative way to leverage government's ability to borrow to help support everyday British Columbians in trying to get to affordability. There clearly will be huge demand for that from the Conservatives. We've seen a few bits and pieces, obviously the big one on the supervised consumption sites, but it's been lacking in events from the Conservatives early on. We expect more and more. We don't expect the platforms, for sure not this week, maybe next week as we build towards the provincial debate that will come up on October 8th.
All right. And an announcement there in Chilliwack, EB feeling the sting, apparently.
Yeah, so he announced something on skills trade, but got a wasp instead, right down his shirt in the middle of the press conference. We've seen that before. Doug Ford got one right in the mouth. So David Eby, the NDP leader, getting a wasp shown right up in the sweater, and then campaign team was able to recover the carcass of that wasp. But yeah, the real announcement was about skills trades. We know there's a shortage across the country in terms of workers available to fill our massive infrastructure deficit that exists. So funding and expanding spots for apprentices to help support that.
Okay, so the last time we chatted, it was the day of BCU merging with the Conservatives, or not merging, but endorsing.
Yep.
And clearly, I can see you're on the move right there, but lots of has changed and moved around. BCU not running any candidates. The independents are really going to be a big wild card. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah, so Eric, this is, I think, the big story framing up the campaign. So, out of the wreckage of BC United were these candidates who were getting ready to run in a campaign. They had signs, they had volunteers, they had office space, and there was a little bit of posturing movement in terms of some showing up as Conservatives. So 3 BC United MLAs jumped over the Conservatives. So the total now is at, when the legislature was dissolved, there were 8 Conservative MLAs. 7 of them came from BC United. The 8th is John Rustad, who was booted from the BC Liberals. All of them were elected as BC Liberals in 2020. Then you had the candidates. So there were a bunch of those BC United candidates. They got plugged into holes where the Conservatives either booted a candidate or had holes. But there were many that remained. So we now have 5 BC United incumbents who are running as independents. So those ridings are 2 in the Peace. So that's Dan Davies and Mike Bernier. 1 in Prince George Caribou. So that's the riding that covers Quesnel. That's Coralie Oaks. We have Tom Shapitka and Kootenay Rocky. So that's Cranbrook. And then the most interesting is Corinne Kirkpatrick. She had announced her retirement. She wasn't going to run again due to family and health issues, and was so frustrated with Kevin Falcon. Can't remember if I knew this when we last spoke. I may have told the story that Corinne was the one who spoke up when Kevin Falcon told the caucus he was quitting. He refused to take any questions from caucus. And then eventually Corinne was able to somehow, through the software, get a question and say, Kevin, you need to resign right now as BC United leader. You need to let someone else run. And Kevin said, nope, and then closed his computer, and he was gone. And Corinne believes that there needs to be, as she describes it, a centrist option. So she's running in West Vancouver, Capilano. So those 5, and then there's a bunch of other candidates, really good ones. Kevin Acton and Vernon Lumby, Stephen Johnston in West Kelowna Peachland, Ashley Ramsey in Kelowna Mission, Dr. Michael Humer in Kelowna Center. You'll notice a theme there because a lot of them are in the Okanagan. Tracy St. Clair in Penticton, and then in the mainland, there's Wendy Yuen in Richmond, as well as Richmond Stevenson, Jackie Lee. So the reason I mention them all is they're all good fundraisers. They're all effective community leaders. They were all sort of seen by BC United as candidates who could potentially do well, even though the polls weren't looking good. So they're all running as independents. And in a lot of those cases, it could be one-on-one matchups with conservatives, for example, in the Peace and West Vancouver Capilano. But in a bunch of the other ones, the interesting part will be, how do they split? How do they split that center-right? And what does that mean for the NDP? Does the NDP now have an opportunity to emerge in some of these places where they wouldn't have had a chance? And if they do, then that obviously will have a profound impact on the outcome.
What about the Greens? Are they expected to play spoilers, or are they contending?
Yeah, so it's tough. They're running in and around 10% of the polls, Eric. I know you spend a lot of time analyzing those polls, and we see, the NDP and the Conservatives up, 42, 43, 44 range. Greens down at 10. It's largely been a consolidated vote on Vancouver Island, which is obviously where we're watching them. We've discussed this before, but Sonia Furstenau, the leader, decided to move from her riding of Cowichan Valley, which got significantly redrawn, to Victoria. It would have been hard for her to win in her old riding of Cowichan Valley, where they carved out the community where she actually lives, Shawnigan Lake. That riding won a Fuka-Malahat that has Shawnigan Lake at its souk, which is a big population base where Sonia has no connection. So she does have connections in Victoria Beacon Hill. Her husband owned a home there. They had been renting it. Now they've moved back into it. There were family reasons for being back in Victoria. So now she's hoping to have some success there, but she's running against a cabinet minister in Grace Lore. Tim Thielman, the Conservatives, getting a lot of attention there. So that's going to be interesting for the Greens. Saanich North in the Islands, MLA Adam Olsen, not running again. Rob Botterill's the candidate there. That's going to be a battle. So the Greens, it's struggling to look at the numbers and say, where are they going to have their success? They spent some time this week in the Kootenays, the riding formerly known as Nelson Creston. And that's a place where in 2020, it was the second closest they got to picking up a seat. An additional one, the closest was West Vancouver Sea to Sky. But, with that polling at 10%, hard to believe they're going to have any really big pickups. But And then where do they split from? Because polls are inconsistent on that too, Eric. Like that gap between where the Greens were last time, where they are now, that vote is scattered. A lot of it's gone conservative. Some has gone NDP, but a lot of that vote's gone conservative.
Yeah, it'll be something to watch. All right. And what are you going to be watching just for the next 2 weeks as we enter this middle part of the campaign?
Yeah, debate, obviously. So debate October 8th is going to be huge, and platforms. So, we're going to see those platforms at some point, but let's focus on debate, because I think more importantly, the debate is going to be a crucial. We haven't seen John Rustad or David Eby on the provincial debate stage. And so this will be the first chance for voters to see them head to head. Neither of them went through leadership races that had a debate. Both of them were, done in a way. The NDP had the chief opponent disqualified against Eby, and Rustad was acclaimed. So we haven't seen the two of them square off against each other on a debate stage, and how they articulate the feeling out there, right? David Eby needs to defend 7 years of the NDP being in power, needs to speak to an electorate that's angry, frustrated, and John Rustad needs to articulate that, he isn't a party full of conspiracy theorists, that they are legitimate and that he can be a legitimate leader. A recent poll showed that 55% of British Columbians think John Rustad is too extreme. I think that's a key piece that he's going to have to show, is he's just a normal dude from the Chaco Lakes, lives on a lake with his wife and drives around on a lawnmower when the grass gets too long. It's going to try to hit on some of those key messaging and saying, well, I understand your concerns about the cost of living here and wanting to potentially leave the province, and I want to keep you here. And he needs to articulate that vision at the debate.
All right. Well, it's a heck of a campaign. I have no idea where it's going to go from here. And I don't know where you're headed off to, but I'm going to wish you safe travels, and looking forward to speaking again, Richard.
Yeah, we're heading to Vancouver Island for the first time. Again, that northern central part of Vancouver Island is key for the NDP. They hold it all now. The Conservatives think they can break through there. That's that classic orange-blue battle. So we'll be there next, and there'll be lots more, and I can't wait to talk again from the campaign trail.
In New Brunswick, Blaine Higgs and the PCs are under pressure from Susan Holt's Liberals. Jacques Poitras is the CBC's provincial affairs reporter in New Brunswick and joins me from Fredericton. Hi, Jacques.
Hi, Eric.
So it's a day after a big day in the campaign. There was a debate last night. It was hosted by CBC and co-hosted by you. You were one of them. First off, what happened in the debate? What were your reflections on it?
Well, the format did not allow for crosstalk and arguments and interruptions, so it wasn't lively in that sense. But I think modestly, we gave the three leaders an opportunity to state their positions on a number of issues. Some of the top issues that have been fermenting for a while leading up this election, and it seemed like everybody sort of got their say and had a fair shot at answering the various questions. The interesting dynamic that's going on in this campaign is that Blaine Higgs, the incumbent, is very deliberately not making a lot of promises. I mean, he doesn't believe in spending a lot of money in government. He doesn't believe that elections should be about promising to spend money, because his belief is that's what gets governments into trouble in the first place financially, is they overpromise trying to win votes. So he's taking this position like, I'm not going to promise a lot of spending commitments. And but what that does, of course, in the dynamic of the campaign is the Liberals and the Greens are out there promising things every day, and he's in a position where he's having to say that that's too expensive or that's impractical or unrealistic. And we saw a bit of that in the debate, when we asked about healthcare and why there's not more primary care access. And he talked about, well, it's difficult because of we need to get more people into the system. And he talked about the things the government is working on, and there are things that they are working on, and they say they are making progress. But in the heat of a campaign, it's easier for an opposition party to say, well, we will do this and this and this. And when the incumbent is stuck having to say, well, here's why that's difficult. It's, that's a political challenge, I think. I think for an incumbent governing party seeking re-election. The only major commitment that Higgs is making is to reduce the provincial sales tax by 2 points. And so that's a real pocketbook issue, obviously. And they are banking on that being the central choice at the ballot box question. But again, it would be hard to campaign for 32 days making that same promise over and over again. Susan Holt, the Liberal leader, she also had a couple of difficult moments, like when we asked about safe injection sites, which are becoming a political issue. The PCs have said that in a new mandate, they would not allow any more of them. And we asked her if she would, and she really didn't answer clearly. So I'm sure some voters picked up on that as well.
Did you see anything in the debate? As you said, there wasn't those one-on-one moments, where sometimes in debates you get to choose which other leader to go after. And from that, you can usually draw some conclusions about the strategies that are at play. But did you see anything in the debate last night between David Kuhn, Blaine Higgs, and Susan Holt that revealed a campaign strategy or a messaging that they're trying to take on the campaign trail?
Well, the PC message is definitely, things are better. The province's financial position is much improved. We have a lot of growth in the province, which in some cases has overwhelmed government's ability to keep up with certain services. But we're working on it, and the growth is good. We welcome the growth, but it needs to be handled, needs to be managed, and that came through certainly from the PC leader. And then with the Liberals and Greens, their message generally, to different degrees and to different spending levels and to different points on the ideological spectrum, is, things are not working. They have not moved fastly enough to address some of these things, and we will do it better and faster by doing these things. And that came through. I will say, like on the sort of analysis of the debate on like looking for those moments. I've sort of, my thinking has evolved on this over the years, and like journalists or people like you, we kind of want something new or novel for the news story. Like, what's the news out of the debate? And often it's a confrontation or some dramatic new thing that no one's heard before. I think we can sometimes forget that a lot of people don't follow politics that closely for 4 years or for 3.5 years, and may not listen to Blaine Higgs and Susan Holt and David Kuhn every day the way I do. And so they may just be looking to like sort of hear them lay out their ideas. What the audience wants can maybe be at odds with what a journalist's expectation or hope is. And so, yeah, again, in that regard, I think although there was no clash, hopefully people who are starting to tune in now that the writ is underway, will have got something out of it.
Well, certainly they would have gotten an introduction to Susan Holt because this was her first one. Higgs is now done. This would have been his third debate. I don't know if there were multiple debates in the past. Kuhn, did he do a debate in 2014? Was he invited to one of those?
I don't recall if he did or not, to be honest. That was the first election that he won a seat in. So
right. But so either way, though, he's been around for 10 years at least in terms of public's the ability to get an idea of who he is. So for Susan Holt, this would have been a big moment to introduce herself, probably for a lot of voters.
Yeah, that's right. And some of the reaction I was seeing last night, I mean, on social media, it's not indicative necessarily of public opinion, but there were a couple of people who commented that that they were kind of, that's Susan Holt, and here's how I think she handled herself. So yeah, but of course, most of the social media stuff was people saying the candidate I liked going in did the best.
Of course, that's how it works. We did see during the debate that there wasn't really a lot of criticism between Susan Holt and David Kuhn. And for Blaine Higgs, he has talked about a coalition between the two. So how is that dynamic playing out, that trying to tie the Liberals with the Greens? And then also I heard trying to tie that agreement with the Trudeau-Singh agreement in Ottawa, even though the parties are a bit different.
That's right. David Kuhn said several months back that he would not, if there's a minority government, if no party wins a majority in this election, that he would not support the PCs in the legislature as long as Blaine Higgs is leader. And so, of course, by elimination, that means Susan Holt is his only dance partner as someone who might hold the balance of power. And then a couple of weeks ago, he said, "Well, we're starting to keep a list, or we're working on a list of conditions that we would put on the table for support." And this, of course, opened the door for this coalition argument. And let's remember, what was going on in Ottawa was not a coalition. There were no NDP ministers in the government. It was a supply and confidence agreement, and it remains to be seen what, if anything, would take shape between the Liberals and Greens here. But it has given the PCs a chance to really drive home this comparison. Of course, if the Trudeau-Singh agreement had led to an incumbent government in Ottawa that was super popular in the polls, I don't think Blaine Higgs would be making this argument. It's the fact that Justin Trudeau is very unpopular right now and way behind in the polls that makes him want to attach this concept to Susan Holt and to David Kuhn and the Greens. So that I think we're going to continue to hear about. And frankly, if that is a plausible scenario after the election, and it's just as plausible as a majority for the Liberals or the PCs, I think it is fair for journalists to ask Susan Holt and David Kuhn, what would you agree to? What would be the basis of an agreement? Because the Greens have a long list, a huge list already of platform commitments, and they wouldn't get them all if there were an agreement in a minority legislature. So it's fair to start to ask, what would that look like? I mean, the Liberals say it's a hypothetical question, but it's no less hypothetical than a Liberal majority at this point.
So we're a little bit over a week into the campaign. The buses are sort of rolling. They're not buses everywhere. That's an interesting, just a quick little note on that, because I think that's an interesting new dynamic. There aren't actual media buses in this campaign.
That's right. One thing that's always a fun rite of passage for any young political reporter in New Brunswick has been to ride the campaign bus of one or both parties for part of the campaign. And, it sort of becomes your mobile office. And it's a way to do a lot more writing while you're rolling than if you're driving yourself. But the Liberals have decided to not have a bus this time. They're very expensive to rent and to set up and equip. The PCs were not sure they were going to have a bus. They had a bus ready last fall when they were looking at an early campaign. They ultimately did decide on the conventional big bus, but it's not a media bus where the journalists are not invited to ride. I think there's an advantage for the campaign team of having what's essentially a mobile office. They can have laptops and printers and things like that set up if they want to. But yeah, it is a shift. And it's interesting that I think in PEI, they had their first campaign bus just in their last election. And it was like a big deal that they were finally getting buses. And meanwhile, just across the strait, we are maybe starting to phase them out.
How else has this campaign unfolded so far? I know that from outside of New Brunswick, one of the issues that was gaining a lot of attention was the policy 713 or 713 on gender identity issues, that kind of thing. Has it been a big issue so far?
It has been talked about. Campaign Life Coalition, which is a religious conservative organization, blitzed the province with flyers ahead of the writ period and has registered as a third party to participate in advertising during the campaign period. A group that is opposed to Higgs and his changes has now registered as a third party as well and is doing lawn signs. So it's definitely, people are definitely engaged with that issue. The question, I think, is whether it will be the ballot box question. And a year ago, when the PCs were losing ministers and suffering all kinds of internal turmoil over this issue, it kind of felt like this would be the defining issue. And had Higgs called an election early last fall, it probably would have been. But he didn't call one, and maybe he felt that cost of living would be a more effective issue for him. We just had this Main Street poll in the last week, which had a sort of statistical tie between the Liberals and the PCs for voting intention. But it showed that, according to Main Street, 50% of respondents supported the PC government's changes to this policy, compared to 35% that opposed. They also found Susan Holt with much higher favorables than Blaine Higgs. So what that tells me is that there's a chunk of the electorate that is fine with what Higgs has done on this policy, but that based on some other issues, like Susan Holt better or plan to vote Liberal instead of PC. And that tells me that it's not the ballot box issue, at least for a significant chunk of voters.
Just a Cole's notes on...
And that's just one poll, of course.
Yeah. Just a Cole's notes on what policy 713 is, just for people who might not be aware of it.
Sure. Well, in 2020, under the Higgs government, they adopted a policy on sexual orientation and gender identity in provincial schools. One of those aspects was that if a child under the age of 16 wanted to adopt a new name or pronoun in school appropriate to their gender identity, they could do that without their parents being informed. The school staff would recognize that and use that name. And then last year, the policy was changed to take that out so that now parental consent is required. And so, not only did it upset a lot of people on the substance, but it was something that the PC government itself had brought in and then went in and undid. And so when you're sort of extending a right and then taking it away, that obviously leads to a lot of questions and scrutiny.
All right. Well, we'll see how it's going to unfold in the next little while. As you said, pocketbook issues seem to be the top thing, with the HST cut from Higgs being promised, and lots of discussion I saw from Susan Holt on schools in terms of class sizes, the state of the healthcare system. What have you seen so far, and does it change any perspectives you would have on what the battlegrounds will be, and especially in terms of where these issues are going to play out across the province and decide the election?
I think we're still going to see the battlegrounds in the places you and I have discussed before, which is that St. John, Fredericton, and Moncton, the three major cities where we've also seen the most of this population growth. There are several ridings there. There's a few outside those cities, but there's several ridings in those three cities that will be, I think, decisive, and that everyone will be watching. I like your sort of way of just describing the three parts of the province, Francophone North, Anglophone Rural South, and the three cities. And if someone wins 2 out of 3 of those chunks, they tend to win the election. I should really go back and over time and try to debunk that, but I think you're right on that. And so, we are seeing in this election, I think that it's the three cities that will be the one that could go either way and decide it. All
right. Well, we've still got a few more. These elections are fast, though. It's only about a 4-week campaign or so. Anything you're going to be watching over the next, 2 weeks as we get into the mid chunk of this campaign?
Well, the debates are often in the midpoint, and so this one was a bit early for some just because of some practical circumstances, and so I think we are going to get into a bit of a lull where the leader tours where reporters start to look at some sort of issue stories and writing profiles and so on, and then there may be other organizations that do debates later in the campaign period, and I think, there'll probably be a couple of polls that'll drop, hopefully, and we'll start to get a feel of where the race is going maybe in another 10 days or so.
All right. Well, it's looking like it'll be a close one, maybe a toss-up. So we would like some more polls and then get some more info as this campaign unfolds. So, Jacques, appreciate it. I know it's going to be a busy time for you, and hopefully we'll get a chance to chat again before Election Day.
Hopefully. Thanks.